Senator, I recognize you, Senator Gray.
Thank you. My name is James Gray. Get that red light on here. My name is James Gray, and I'm here to introduce Senate Bill SB 60. My constituency starts in Belknap County and Alton, Gilmanton, comes down Route 11 all the way to Rochester. Senate Bill 60 is a request from the department. The department and the city of Rochester and several of the other communities have a long history of discussing water quality, having to do with both nitrogen, phosphorus, how you measure oxygen in the water, and a whole bunch of other things. And this bill, intent from the department, which I'm sure that they will speak of, and other people, is an attempt to come together. And they are still working on that. I told them that it would be good to have the public hearing first and then hold the bill for a little while so that if there are any other issues that would come up from the public hearing, that they could also be included in their negotiation or talk or however you want to say it. So with that, I mean, the bill's in front of you. It makes some changes to how much water that you can withdraw from aquifers during certain periods and all of that good stuff. It takes out some of the reference. If you look at the last page, page 4, where it's on 11 through 12, it strikes out some of the stuff that we fought hard to get in a little while ago. But again, if taking that out is in the best interest of the state of New Hampshire and the citizens that I represent, certainly we want that to be negotiated between them. So I would request that when you get to it, that you suspend executing this bill for a little bit of time to give them the opportunity to incorporate anything from this hearing into that and come back with a better bill.
Sounds good. Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. See you shortly.
Thank you.
Sherry Young, not opposing, not supporting, but wishing to speak. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you and good morning, Chairman Avard and other members of the Senate. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I represent the city of Rochester. My name is Sherry Young. I'm with the law firm of Rath, Young & Pignatelli and have been representing the city for many, many years. The SB 60, as proposed, raised some concerns on behalf of the city with respect to its public water system, which dates back to the 1800s, and they have multiple reservoirs and move water between reservoirs and withdraw. And the concern was that the limits on, or the numerics of exceeding 20,000 gallons per day over a 7-day period or more than 600,000 gallons over a 30-day period is far, far less than what the city of Rochester uses for its public water supply. So we were concerned that it was going to impose additional requirements for 401 certification or otherwise. So we've been in discussions, as Senator Gray mentioned, with the Department of Environmental Services, and in particular Ted Deers, who is here. He has proposed an amendment which I think will address most, if not all, of our concerns, but we would like a little more time to resolve the issues between us, and I think we are almost there. So, and the only other thing I will mention is at the very end, as Senator Gray noted, there's an elimination of the 7Q10. They're bringing the 7Q10 flow back after we had gotten it removed several years ago. We understand that it could be beneficial to other communities to bring back the 7Q10, which is the very low flow conditions. And again, we're working on a compromise on rulemaking that would allow us some flexibility there. So we're not likely to oppose that either.
Okay. Do you want an exclusion on that for your area? Would that help you, or?
Yes, it would.
well. I mean, it's obviously every area has a particular need, so we're, you know, if that can create a hardship, unnecessary hardship, if you have some language that you would at least want us to consider when we exec this, if you would throw it our way, we'd appreciate it.
Great, I
Yeah.
will. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any questions from the committee? Senator Pearl?
I don't think so. I think, who else do we have testify? I guess I'm reading this bill. Thank you. I'll ask the question. You may not be the one to answer it. As I'm reading through this, and I don't know that this is your area of expertise, and I'm trying to understand if this will impact any water withdrawals from the ag world, you know, doing irrigation. And I don't know if you know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer, but I think Ted Deers could respond to that,
Okay.
and he is here this morning
Is he
representing
testifying too?
Department of Environmental Services,
Well, I was
yes.
going to let Ted talk.
All right, then I'll hold my question. Thank you.
It's a TED Talk. I thought it was funny. It's a timing thing. All right. Thank you for no further questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, now for Ted.
You should be prepared for my question.
Every word out of my mouth is a TED Talk. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Ted Deers. I'm the Assistant Director of the Water Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. It's a real pleasure to be here in front of you today to talk about this bill. Sort of an omnibus bill that talks about most things water quality as they relate to 485A, largely A12. So this is really about surface waters. That's the nature of this bill. It's a few words changes that I've presented you with a 4-page letter of testimony and a 12-page slideshow. What I'm going to try to do is to very quickly demystify what it is that's going on here for you in just a couple of minutes, because it's pretty straightforward. And along the way, I'm going to talk about some of the things that Attorney Young talked about, as well as some other concerns that have been raised by stakeholders in the conversations that we've had since this bill became a bill. So just really quickly, if I can, I have a slideshow that I've put together, and just to be able to have in big print for everybody to be able to see kind of what it is in one piece, what's going on here. If you go to the second page, it's basically provisions of SB 60. There's really 6 parts to this bill that we've identified, and I'm going to go through each of those very quickly. But I just this presentation here, just on page 2, this just goes through those are the 6 provisions which are part of this. Sorry, overview. So it's overview of. I made a different slide for you than I did for me. How about that? So the overview just says the 6 provisions, and I'm going to go through each of those really quickly because I think they're pretty easy to understand when you see each one of them. So the basic premise of this whole bill is that it cleans up some stuff that's been in language for a long time, helps to define some various aspects of this. These are essentially permits, but you see none of the trappings of legislative language you would normally see about permits in 485A. And that's just sort of the historical evolution of this stuff. So we're putting in some of those permit kinds of things, clarifies some things in the bill, and helps to connect different parts of how we regulate surface waters. So those are really the 4 components of what it is we're doing. If we skip just really quickly, the first section of this, the first 2 provisions, are really about 401 certifications. So I'm just going to give the 30-second elevator speech about what is a 401 certification. Section 401 of the Clean Water Act affords the states the ability and the requirement that we certify whether or not a federal permit that meets certain criteria will adhere to state water quality standards. Our state water quality standards are, the authority for that is set forth in 45A8, and the rules for that, the actual water quality standards, are laid out in ENV WQ 1700. So this is how the feds then approve our water quality standards, and after that, anyone who applies for a major project, big highway project, FERC relicensing on the Connecticut River, those kinds of really large projects. These are not the small projects that get like your standard wetlands permit. These are the largest, generally the largest projects in the state. The state is required to look at them and say, does this gonna meet water quality standards? We have to sign off on that before the federal permit can go forward. That's 401 certification in a nutshell. The other thing that 401 has included over time is surface water quality, surface water withdrawals. So if you wanted to get a groundwater withdrawal, a large groundwater withdrawal, we have a whole groundwater permitting process you're probably very familiar with. It's been in front of this committee any number of times. Surface water withdrawals are really controlled through this same sort of certification process by DES. So, but again, it says it in the rules, but doesn't really have the trappings of a permitting process, which is why we're requesting to add some of the language that you'll see in front of you. So I'm going to skip right to the chase here and start diving in to a few of these provisions. The first provision, there's a page that says 401 cert waiver. The federal 401 regs afford the state 4 things you can do with a 401. You can either approve it, you can deny it, you can approve it with conditions, or you can waive it. We don't have the ability to waive a 401 certification in our state law, but it exists in federal law. We think that's a problem because there's some projects that while they meet the criteria for a 401 certification, they're so minor that it really is kind of ridiculous for us to take the time of the applicant and of the department to try to look at these. I'll give you a really good example of a recent example. The new water line that's being laid underneath underneath Little Bay from Portsmouth to Dover. Interconnection line between the two cities. It sits basically, it's just replacing what was there. They're not disturbing the bottom of the estuary. All the connections are all minor. There's really very, very little, almost no environmental impact. It's something that we would have written a waiver for, not having them apply to us and not having state time spent on a project of inconsequential impact. We can't waive that. That's an important provision so that we can match our law up with the federal law. That's number one. Number two, it starts to put in permit timeframes. As I mentioned, there's no timeframes in the statute as to when DES has to act on your application to us. So this starts to set out a process that looks very much like other permitting processes if you look at the bill, and it sets up a certain time period in which people have where we have to make sure the application is complete. We have a certain time period to get back to you to say yes, there's some problems with your application, or yes, it's good. One of the things that you'll see in our letter is we'd like to add another provision into that would allow for more time for the applicant to be able to respond back. That was a little, I think, a misstep in the original crafting of this, is that we don't allow for the applicant themselves to take as much time as they need to get us the information that would be required. So that's kind of the big part of that, and that sits both for, you'll see it in 2 places. It's not only in the 401 certifications on the federal permits, but also on the surface water withdrawal section. That's sections 3 and sections 4. There is, and you may hear if DOT testifies today, and I'll certainly not necessarily put words in their mouth, but we've had conversations about their concerns that by setting timeframes in our statute, it may conflict with federal timeframes that are set by the agencies. The way 401 works is that the federal agency sets a reasonable time period for each 401 certification. Usually they do that in cooperation with the state. And if we had statutory language, it would give the feds guidance as to how much time we really need in order to be able to process a 401 certification. That would inform the federal process and provide us leverage on those federal agencies as to how much time that they give. That's important to us, and I think it's important, could be important to applicants. The flip side of that is that if the feds don't grant that much time, and we have it sitting in statute, we could end up with a conflict where we would have to either waive the certification or potentially deny it. So we think that that's a place in which over the next few weeks, while we're also talking with Rochester about some of their concerns, that we might come back to you with some sort of a safety valve as to what would happen in that circumstance. So that's one challenge that you're going to hear to this. I think it's workable because I think the federal agencies under the new 401 certification rules, which will be coming out, will be able to adjust to based on our statute, but we haven't seen those yet. So I think that there may be some room for play right there. The third part of this is about water withdrawals. And so I mentioned that it already has, we put in some time as to processing time. The other piece of this is that we're adding in a trigger. That's where you see these numbers, this 20,000 gallons per day, those numbers in there. That is at on the second page at line, let's see, it's at 4 on the second page. Under 3, enforcement of classification. So currently, the way that this works is that the law refers back to another statute, which is the groundwater registration statute, water use registration statute. What's weird about it is that it refers to the entire statute, when really the only provision that it was ever intended to really refer to was the registration provision, which is that 20,000 gallons a day over a 7-day period. It was never meant to refer to the entire statute. It was just a trigger as to the size of a withdrawal that needs to get a water quality certification. So that's what this is fixing. And so the rationale for that is just to make sure that you're not bringing in other provisions. And if 488.3 was ever changed, the specific trigger would always be here and would never have to be gone and have a modification made. The second part of that would be very specific to whether or not a water withdrawal, if it was an increase over your previous withdrawal, would need a new water quality certificate. This is written in such a way that that would happen. We've had a lot of conversations with stakeholders since that time, and we think that that provision probably ought to be thought about a little bit more before you go forward. We think that it doesn't change the situation from today. It wouldn't affect anything existing. That's our intent with this language, is that nothing that's existing today would be affected. But we've had now several attorneys read it, and you know what happens when lots of attorneys read the same words. You get lots of different opinions. And so we're appreciative of that, and we really want to take the time to make sure that we don't screw this up for existing water users. So we would ask that that particular language be stricken from the change that we had suggested, because we want to make sure that everybody understands that this does not affect your existing water uses, such as the ones you heard about in Rochester, where not only do they have water withdrawals, but they also have diversions that move water from water body to water body. The last bit, two little pieces in this that we just think are sort of cleanup language. One is to make sure that our rules include, our rules for 401 certifications include public notification and public hearings. That seems important. It would reflect what the agency's practices and desires are in other statutes. The other one is making sure that water conservation rules apply to both groundwater and surface water equally. This already exists for many surface water withdrawals, any ones that are subject to the in-stream flow program, but it also is a sort of a level playing field kind of thing, where large groundwater withdrawals and large surface water withdrawals should be treated very similarly from a water conservation perspective. And then the last provision, which Attorney Young was kind enough to explain about, and I think Senator Gray did a fantastic job of explaining it, relative to nutrient effluent calculations. This is seriously deep in the tundra here when you're talking about nutrient effluent calculations. This is something that EPA does when they're writing our permits for discharges in the state. And first of all, EPA doesn't have to listen to what the state says on this. So that's one issue. But the other issue is that we found that by putting this provision in, it has the potential to hurt other communities and hurt them in that they would have to be required to have lower levels of phosphorus in their effluent, which could be very, very expensive. So what we're doing, and this is what Attorney Young, I think, suggested, is that we are going to be crafting rules which reflect how you would go about doing these nutrient setting. And when we do that, EPA will adopt those rules, and then they can use them too. That will allow what the communities are looking for, which is more options. Right now, EPA is using only this as an option. What we'd like to be able to set up is that there would be multiple options that could fit the realities of the community and the water body that they're discharging to. So that was the nitty-gritty of all of this. You have the slides there if you wish to digest them. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have now or afterwards. We're going to be having some good conversations. We'll keep Senator Gray in the loop on all of those conversations with the stakeholders. And I'll leave it at that for today.
All right, while we're in the process of digestion, any questions from the committee? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the previous person. That as I'm reading through this, I was searching through the statute as well. In your opinion, is this going to impact any of the water withdrawals that are currently going on in the ag world pertaining to irrigation? Is it going to require any new registration or any more paperwork for the farmers?
Thank you for the question. This is something we think about a lot, and our intention is not to expand the universe of regulation. Our intent is to very clearly define the universe of regulation. Currently, any water user, agricultural or otherwise, golf courses, and municipal water supplies, if they reach this criteria of 20,000 gallons a day over a 7-day period or 600,000 gallons over a 30-day period, they are required to register with the state. If it's a new withdrawal over that amount, then they would have to get a water quality certification. That's the way it's always been. That doesn't change for anybody.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Bertzel?
I think you might have answered the question, but defining the withdrawal rates and conditions of service water withdrawals, I know in my town of Hampstead, they had a major issue with the water withdrawal from one of the water companies pulling water out in massive amounts, and then the wells on one of the main streets went dry.
Right.
Would this impact that at all?
Thank you for the question. The answer is no. Those are primarily groundwater withdrawals, as I recall from Hampstead. This does not cover groundwater withdrawals in the slightest. But it's kind of synonymous in that if you have an upstream water user that's withdrawing water that could affect you, you would certainly want the department to take that into consideration for your water withdrawal downstream. So that's what we do with this kind of certification, is make sure that if there's a new water user coming in, that it doesn't have an undue effect on either the environment or on other uses of the water downstream.
Okay. So you said that only the feds can grant a waiver?
Yes, sir.
We cannot grant our own waivers?
Yes, sir.
Have you talked with our federal delegation about this yet?
Not
as far as asking for waivers or adopting rules to grant?
We haven't, because this is purely a state issue. It's purely a state issue because it's our state law which doesn't allow us to do waivers. The feds are happy if we want to do a waiver. That's less paperwork for them. But we don't have the ability in state law to be able to do that. That's the nature of this provision.
Okay, so we want the waivers,
We-
the ability to make the waivers.
I would very much like to have the ability to have waivers.
Ted said so. All right. All right, that's what I was unclear about.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, why? Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. Then that answers a lot of my questions.
Great.
Further questions on this? Seeing none, so you recommend that we just wait for some more further conversation to go on so that we can fix little things that need to be fixed.
Yes, I respectfully request that you put off exec on this bill for a couple of weeks until we have an opportunity to make sure that we've worked out some of these issues with stakeholders.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ted.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. All right. So, DS is in support, not wishing to speak. Kevin Nyman, New Hampshire DOT, not in support, not against, but wishing to speak, and you are our final speaker on this.
Great, good morning, thank you. All right, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Good-
Kevin.
Good morning, thank you, sir.
All right.
Members of the committee, for the record, Kevin Nyan, and I manage the environmental office at DOT. And I'd like to, Mr. Deers accurately provided an introduction to what I'm about to say, and that is the Department of Transportation is also looking for an opportunity to continue to work with the Department of Environmental Services to work out some language in the bill, specifically as it relates not to water withdrawals, but to the timeframes that the bill sets up for DES to act on a request for certification. I think it's important to point out that if you are looking on page 2 on lines 9 through 12 of the bill, there's a provision in there that DES shall deny a request for certification if the federal agency has not, if in DES's opinion, the federal agency hasn't provided enough time for DES to act on a certification. And that would have, I think, unintended consequences for development throughout the state. And just as an example, every 4 years or so, the EPA issues a general permit for construction, for large construction activities throughout the state. And it's my understanding that this last time around, that was issued without an opportunity, without sufficient opportunity for DES to gather the public input that they'd need to inform their water quality certification. And in that event, if this bill were passed as it is today, in that event, it would have required a statutory denial of that permit, which would have had the effect of essentially stopping all major construction projects throughout the state that required certification, as I read the bill. So having the opportunity to work through these challenges or these language concerns is very important to the department. So I do have a letter that I'll share when I'm done, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Kevin. Questions from the committee? All right, can you work with Ted and the city of Rochester, obviously, and Senator Gray, and maybe coming up with some language for an amendment that we can, so we can.
Ted's tough to work with, but I will. I'll do my best. Yeah. Of course, yes, sir.
Poor Ted.
I know. All right, and no further questions. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Excellent,
Appreciate
thank
it. I have nobody else to speak on this unless I have any takers in the audience. Going once, going twice, and we'll close the hearing on this. We'll exec this later, but not today. How you doing?
Well, how you doing?
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah. What's our time frame? 10:15, 10:30. We have one more minute, I think.
Sorry,
Oh, it's 9:30. Yep.
I got your message, but much too late to change anything that was already enacted.
Yeah, I can recess.
No, we can,
You want to go forward?
this is rip the Band-Aid off.
All right.
There was people here who traveled, and I wanna
Yeah.
honor their time.
Oh, we can.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if you're trying to.
I don't know if we're gonna have time to exec. I gotta be out of here by 12, so.
Yeah, me too.
um, You are recognized. So-
Good morning. So Ezra is about to come around with an amendment that I'd like to introduce with this bill to a specific portion of the bill, and here it comes. And I'm prepared to talk about that at the end of my testimony. Good morning, Chairman Avard and honorable committee members. My name is Deborah Altschuler, and I represent Senate District 24, which includes the towns of Exeter, Greenland, Hampton, Hampton Falls, Northampton, Rye, and Stratham. I am here to introduce Senate Bill 267 relative to rulemaking for advanced recycling facilities. If we only knew then what we know now. I wish I had known. This would have been great to know beforehand. All three of these are statements of regret uttered after a decision was made without all the information needed to make a good decision. The repercussions from bad decisions made out of ignorance don't mitigate the damage done. They hopefully guide our future decision making. We have an opportunity right now to guide good decision-making for the future of New Hampshire's air, water, and soil quality because we have some good information that we can use to be proactive in this venture. Senate Bill 267's statement of purpose is the heart of this legislation. Given the emerging and untested nature of advanced recycling as an industrial process, the broad range of toxic pollutants, including per- and polyfluorinated alkali substances, PFAS, benzene, heavy metals, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that can be present in plastic materials processed through advanced recycling, the potential for such toxic pollutants to result in air, water, and soil pollution that is harmful to public health and the environment, and New Hampshire's experience with widespread PFAS pollution, it is prudent to ensure public health and environmental safety and to avoid the adverse economic impacts of pollution by establishing appropriate rules for the permitting and operation of advanced recycling facilities. Currently, there are 7 advanced recycling facilities in the United States, and the American Chemistry Council sees advanced recycling, which involves dissolving or heating up plastic to break it down to its original raw components, as a new revenue stream. Craig Cookson, Senior Director of Plastic Sustainability at the American Chemistry Council, said in an interview with Politico this past July, the article is provided for you in your packet, quote, "Plastics recycling is a little bit more in its infancy compared to paper and aluminum and steel. So we are catching up. And again, our members are investing over $7 billion in domestic reclamation for the recycling of plastics." Chemical companies are touting advanced manufacturing as a potential new source of plastics that would help manufacturers avoid the need for virgin plastic and find a way to break down mixed plastics and foam food containers that are not economical to recycle with conventional methods. What we didn't know when we were using PFAS-laden products like firefighting foam was exposure to PFAS has been linked to a range of health problems, including liver damage, thyroid problems, weakened immune systems, cancers, developmental issues, reproductive problems like decreased fertility, and the cancers listed so far are liver, testicular, and kidney cancers, and that is not even an exhaustive list. We may not have known all of those things until fairly recently, but it turns out the maker of the most commonly produced products with PFAS in them did. In fact, government documents recovered show that the DuPont company's own researchers knew back in 1961 that this chemical was toxic, and then proceeded to bury that information while producing thousands of products that have done and still do real harm to our public health and environmental safety. In 1978, 3M knew through their own studies that their own employees were accumulating this toxin in their blood and buried this information too while people developed fatal cancers. I've provided you with articles and links to the DuPont concealed evidence. So, will we learn from this past? Will we recognize that without strong rules and guardrails, expecting chemical companies to protect our public health is like expecting Lucy to let Charlie Brown kick the football? There are no doubt quite a few people here today who disagree with this proposal for undertaking a new rulemaking process. In fact, I got a courtesy call from Director Wimsatt last night letting me know that the Department of Environmental Services would be coming here today to oppose this bill and sending in all their heavy hitters. It reminded me of 4 years ago when Commissioner Scott fought against former Senators Fuller Clark and my predecessor, Dr. Sherman's efforts to set more protective levels of PFAS chemicals in our drinking water. I've provided you with a copy of an article that covered that. I will admit, I'm very disappointed that once again, the Department of Environmental Services, which states right on their homepage, the mission is to help sustain a high quality of life for all citizens by protecting and restoring the environment and public health in New Hampshire. The protection and wise management of the state's environment are the main goals of the agency. They seem to be falling short of that aspiration in opposition of this bill. Hopefully, like they did in 2019, they will reverse course and join in the effort to be proactive with setting some reasonable and necessary guardrails in place before we have another public health crisis to manage. We can all agree that reduction of plastic products that become waste is a vital part of addressing the world's plastic crisis. Simultaneously, though, we have to acknowledge the reality of this emerging technology and take the proactive steps to ensure that we have a set of rules that ensures public health and environmental safety and avoids the adverse economic impacts of pollution. For the health of our people and the state that we love, I strongly urge the committee to recommend Senate Bill 267 ought to pass.
Thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee?
So,
Do you want to speak
Mr.
to your
Chair.
amendment?
if I may.
Yep.
Great. So the amendment makes a change. Most specifically, if you flip to page 2 of the amendment, line 11 through 18. This section and any rules adopted under this section shall apply to facilities that engage in advanced recycling as defined by RSA 149M4 1A, and any facility that engages in high heat or chemical processing of post-use polymers or recovered feedstock using technologies such as depolymerization, gasification, pyrolysis, or solvolysis, regardless of whether the facility produces as its primary product hydrocarbons that are marketed, sold, or used as fuel for energy. And you'll most likely hear testimony that that is not the intent of anyone coming here to New Hampshire. But there's no harm and actually all benefit in providing this as a guardrail. And B, produces hydrocarbons on more than an incidental basis as fuel for use within the facility. So minor changes that just put some bumpers on what could be a very exciting and interesting way to address some of the landfill issues with plastics.
Senator Waters with a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll do my best.
Thank you, Senator. So I'm just thinking about my memory on this, is I signed a letter last year requesting that there be some rulemaking on these facilities after we passed the legislation. And the response from DES was that we don't have legislative authority to do rulemaking, so that's why this bill is coming forward.
Yeah, so bonus for DES, we are following through on their request for legislation to enable them to engage in rulemaking.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Okay,
Thank you very much.
you're very welcome. And I'll remind the audience, anybody who's testifying, if you would not disparage anybody in our departments, we would appreciate it. We like to protect the integrity, and this is a field, everybody's doing their job, and we would appreciate you to be respectful of individuals. You can disagree with the policy, but we would appreciate you not name calling. And with that, we'll hear from, let's see, Roger Stevenson.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 267. My name is Roger Stevenson. I represent the Union of Concerned Scientists. I live in Stratham. It's my desire to point out to you 3 issues which argue for the need for scrutiny and rigorous regulatory oversight of advanced recycling facilities and operations in New Hampshire. First, the technology is relatively new. Technological fixes are unproven and ineffective. According to researchers, proof of chemical recycling remains largely undisclosed outside of laboratory trials. For the interested party, much will be found in theory, but little or no substance given to practice. Second, claims by the industry are misleading. Plastics to fuels is not recycling anything except toxic chemicals. Industry communications are replete with disinformation. The advanced recycling company Agilyx states we can turn post-use plastics back into their original chemical components for continued use over and over again. This is misleading. First, plastic waste that may be recycled into new plastic is not a solution because of degradation. The plastic material can be reused once, maybe twice. The company further states that the plastics can be turned into feedstocks such as naphtha or jet fuel or diesel or bunker fuel. Doing so is not recycling. So the claims that advanced recycling aims to increase the rate of plastic recycling from 10 to 90% are false and misleading. Disinformation is a business model for increasing profits, markets, often at the expense of public health and the environment. Third, industry practices are often obscure because of proprietary data and operations. Lack of transparency can lead to misleading or missing data related to harmful emissions into our air and water. According to researchers, grossly inadequate reporting exists on the status of chemical recycling, which, along with a lack of independent evidence on the technology, appears to have led it to being portrayed above and well beyond its capabilities. Much greater transparency and operations and environmental impact must be provided as standard. In conclusion, because of the risks inherent with new technology, because of corporate disinformation, and because industry cloaks its operations, the protection of our air, water, and public health must rely on rulemaking specific to advanced recycling as well as rigorous oversight and accountability moving forward. I urge you to support Senate Bill 267 as amended. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. So Michael Fitzgerald and Mr. Wimsatt from the department.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mike Wimsatt. I serve as Director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And with me this morning, I have Mike Fitzgerald, who serves as Assistant Director of our department's Air Division. We appreciate the opportunity to testify regarding Senate Bill 267. I've provided a copy of our letter of testimony to the clerk. I guess the briefest way to say is DES does oppose this bill for two really main reasons. One is that we believe that the existing authorities under our water, air, and waste programs for regulating the activities at a facility like an advanced recycling facility and the emissions and discharges from such a facility, that those rules are adequate to provide sufficient and appropriate protections. Also, we believe there are a number of technical flaws with the bill that we have articulated. I do want to point out we've not seen the amendment, so I'll reserve comment on that because I haven't quite sorted exactly what that would, how that might change our testimony. I also just want to point out, and Mike may speak to this, that there was a change. We do see these bills as they come to us for a fiscal impact worksheet. And there's at least one of our comments that is really based on what was the first version of the bill we saw and not the bill that's before you today. So we want to reserve the right to amend our letter of testimony to reflect that. In essence, what this bill would do would be to require rulemaking to assess cumulative impacts of such a facility and also enumerates a number of standards to look at in determining what would constitute a facility posing no undue risk of harm. And without commenting on the appropriateness of that, we just note that that is a new area for us. That's not something that this cumulative risk impact is not something we've done or been authorized to do in our rulemaking. It would take a significant effort to do that. It would be a complex rulemaking. And we believe it would probably take a position, we'd probably have to hire a position to do that, and that we would certainly need far more time than the bill provides for doing such a rulemaking. The other point is that while reasonable people can debate whether that's an appropriate way to approach our rulemaking overall, this is a boutique situation which applies a very complex rulemaking assignment and applies it to one specific type of facility. And again, we believe that the rules that we have in place in our various media programs in air, water, and waste are sufficient to provide adequate protections for the state, for the people of the state, for a facility like this. In addition, there are, as I mentioned, a number of technical flaws. Most of those relate to our Air Division's regulatory framework for these facilities. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Fitzgerald in a moment. But I also wanted to note that establishing rulemaking mandates under 149M, the solid waste statute, is a little bit puzzling to us because Senate Bill 367, which passed this House and which Senator Altshuler mentioned in her testimony, essentially said for facilities that are not making fuel, it excluded facilities that would be primarily producing fuel. But for advanced recycling facilities doing other activities, such as reducing plastics to their monomers for future manufacturing, are essentially exempt. The plastics materials that would come into a facility like that as raw material have been exempted from regulation as a solid waste under RSA 149M. And those facilities would not be regulated. And further, even if they were producing fuel, they really are permit-exempt processing and treatment facilities that have a modest host of requirements that are applied under 149M under the solid waste statute. That doesn't mean that those facilities aren't fully regulated under all of our media programs, air, water, and waste, with respect to their activities and any emissions or waste that they generate. So it's a little puzzling to us to be giving such a significant and encompassing rulemaking under the authority of 149M, when in large part these materials and processes have been exempted under the very same statute. And the bill doesn't propose to undo what Senate Bill 367 did last year. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mr. Fitzgerald to talk about the Air Division issues.
So good morning, thank you. Again, Mike Fitzgerald, I'm the Assistant Director of the Air Division. I also have with me today Kathy Beam, who is in charge of our Planning Bureau and also has significant experience in permitting. So if there are specific questions with regards to permitting, I may ask Kathy to address those. I think Mike did a great job of characterizing some of the key areas of our concern. Again, as noted, the bill that we responded to and wrote our fiscal note and our letter of testimony has been changed as introduced. So some of our concerns, we haven't had a chance to really evaluate those changes and or the amendment that was seen. And we'd want a chance to do that. But a couple of key areas. As Mike mentioned, cumulative impacts, determination of cumulative impacts with regards to air exposure is a very significant and emerging area of concern and an area of significant debate right now, and a significant discussion. You know, when you cite a facility and you take a look, cumulative impacts usually refers to there's 5 facilities, similar types of facilities nearby that may issue other pollutants, and what are the synergistic effects, et cetera. It's an exceeding complex area of regulation that we do not have a lot of experience in, and we don't have a lot of guidance from federal EPA on right now. It's currently being discussed. I do also want to note that EPA has put out an information request last year to gather information with regard to advanced recycling facilities. They have not taken any action as of yet. They are in the information gathering phase. And so we certainly feel it would be appropriate to see what EPA comes out with from this process, and once they've gathered information on these facilities to determine whether they need to regulate. As Director Wimsatt mentioned, it would be unusual for us to regulate a facility on the basis of the type of facility that it is, rather than on the basis of specific pollutants. Typically, when we look at an air permit, we will sit down, we will meet with the permittee, we will understand their process, we will get process flow diagrams, and then we will see how our existing rules apply, and what types of permits they might need, whether they be under air toxics requirements. But again, all of our regulations are under 125. So there could be inconsistencies with regards to RSA 125 and the direction that we are given under whatever ultimate version of this bill, if it were to move forward. I think I'll reserve the remainder of my comments there. They're pretty highly detailed with regards to, I'd just note that the definition of cumulative impacts and some of the terms such as rates of relevant cancer, rates of acute and chronic illness, and exceedance of a lifetime individual risk of cancer in 1 in a million and the hazard index on lines G and H, page 2, lines 1 through 4. Those may not be consistent with the way that we evaluate risk in the determination of air permits. And I would also note that the determination of BACT, B-A-C-T, best available control technology, that's a very specific term that we apply as defined by EPA, and there may be inconsistencies in the determination of BACT for such a wide variety. If you'll notice on page 2, starting line 10, shall require BACT for benzene, polycyclic PAHs, dioxins, and a wide host of different pollutants. Determination of BACT for that wide variety of pollutants on one individual facility may be an exceedingly complex undertaking. And we would need to also make sure that we were working in accordance with EPA's determination of BACT and their procedures for the determination of BACT. So there may be some inconsistencies there. I think with that, I would hold any further comments, and we would certainly like the opportunity to take a look at the amendment and to better assess the current version of the bill that is, again, different from what we evaluated when we wrote our fiscal note. So,
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning. And I had, just a couple of questions about your testimony here. I do recall very well, of course, on 367, a lot of the discussion about the regulation that would be done no matter what comes out of the smokestack and what might come out of, any water discharges, and that those be monitored no matter what we did with 367. And I also recall that we did include in 367 an amendment that lets you actually get into the plant in certain ways to examine the materials that were there. And so I think that, to me, the questions kind of come down to, given the job that you already do, are there some areas that we may need to look at given the nature of the facilities and the nature of the chemicals? And I can understand the response of the department to the letter last summer that belief the existing rules and regulations apply here. But I did want to kind of circle back to the cumulative impacts area, because I do think, as Senator Altshuler mentioned in her testimony, that this is something we've learned, isn't it, over the last number of years, with whether it's PFAS or, all kinds of chemicals, particularly in childhood and in utero, the cancer rates. And we're seeing this, and it is hard to capture. But on that area, though, it seems though you indicate that there is actually some need to look at cumulative impacts, that we recognize that's an area that needs some attention as we move forward on all kinds of chemicals, not just the ones related to this kind of facility.
Yeah, I will say, and I think it's fair to say that cumulative impacts, obviously everybody that's in this business, whether they're a regulator or a consultant or a legislator, our primary concern is that people don't get exposed to contaminants, and to the extent they do get exposed, they don't experience a risk that risks their health. And so you have to look at cumulative impacts to understand that, because to the extent that cumulative impacts are a real thing and they can cause health impacts, we want to be concerned about that. So I think the agency and the public at large and this legislature could have a very robust discussion about how would we go about regulating cumulative impacts. But I think we'd have to have that discussion across all of our regulatory programs and all of the facilities that we regulate, to try to do that really, which would be groundbreaking really in many respects, to try to do that specific to one type of facility, which you've heard testimony says we don't really know much about these facilities. And I think that is true. There's not a lot of examples of them, and there's a handful of them in the country that are operating. My understanding is that in order to operate a facility like this, it typically requires one of the biggest challenges is having enough raw material available nearby to operate the facility. But it's also very capital intensive to build and operate one of these facilities. It's a big endeavor. So as a result, there aren't very many of them in the nation. And we don't know whether there will be a number of them, many more of them in the near future or not. But to the extent that we don't know very much about that, I don't know that trying to experiment or do our first endeavor into cumulative risk impact or cumulative impacts rulemaking in an area we don't know very much about. I don't know, this bill, nothing in this you could ever write in this bill is going to tell us about things we don't know about. I mean, we didn't understand the risks associated with PFAS. We didn't understand the significant risks associated with air emissions of PFAS and what it could mean for groundwater and drinking water quality. So someone could have told us to do rulemaking on that 15 years ago, but if we didn't know what the risks were, we wouldn't have known what to do for rules. And I think that arguably that may be true here. So I think that, and that's a roundabout, I'm probably more than you wanted to know, but I do think that cumulative risk is an important thing to look at as we do our rulemaking, but I think it's something we should be looking at from a much bigger lens, looking at all of our regulatory programs. And I don't know that our first endeavor into it in an area, one particular type of facility, I don't know. To me, that would take a lot of resources for very little gain, possibly for a facility that will never even be cited here. If we're going to do that, it seems like it would be for facilities we already know we have.
So if I may.
If I could just add one comment to that.
I was going to ask you a question next too, so you go right ahead.
Okay. I think it's important, as I mentioned, to note that EPA has opened this docket to look at these facilities and to truly understand what type of risks they may pose and what type of regulatory approach would be important. You know, in the Air Division, largely what we apply are federal regulations. We are delegated by the feds to apply the federal standards. Now, we do have our own state standards in certain areas, particularly toxics, which are perhaps more stringent. But I think this may be a little bit, this type of determination of cumulative impacts and risk from these facilities may be just putting the cart before the horse a little bit here, because if EPA doesn't understand what these facilities are and what risks they may pose and constitute, and are seeking information on this, and I can provide you with information on the EPA docket, get your web links and so on. But I think it's important that says something that's way beyond what New Hampshire DES has the resources and capabilities to do.
Yeah, if I may.
So.
Senator Waters, go ahead.
Yeah, and then I have one other as well, Mr. Chairman. So, just a quick clarification: does the RFI from the EPA include cumulative impact study?
I couldn't say, but I can certainly research that and
seems to be
provide
a
information.
significant-
I will say that cumulative impacts, particularly associated with environmental justice, I'm sure you all heard the environmental justice, you know, that's a major push from the current administration. Obviously, particularly in heavily populated areas, very, very dense areas, large cities and so on, where there are environmental justice concerns, cumulative impact concerns are intertwined with those, because there are so many types of facilities, and there's also, you know, toxicity from motor vehicles and density of sources, et cetera. So, but I don't have the specific information on the EPA information request today.
All right, thank you.
Provide
that would be significant. And
yes.
Just to note and kind of make a comment on what I've heard from both of you is that, you know, in terms of the environmental justice side, our HHS, a couple summers ago in kind of a study we were doing, said it's about $400 million a year impact from air pollution on cost on health of our, particularly our children with asthma, but also
Yes.
cardiopulmonary. So the environmental justice, you know, even though we don't think of our state as having these huge industrial areas, the impacts here are certainly dramatic in some of the
we
areas
certainly see
that would
those.
apply to. But it does sound to me that even if we were to bracket off this kind of plant, that we do know that the chemicals that are involved are ones, whether it's associated with this kind of plant or not, that are possible to study for cumulative impacts. And it does sound to me, from Mr. Wimsatt's testimony, that you might welcome some legislative direction to look at cumulative impacts of these kinds of chemicals, whether it's in the context of a plant that might or might not get built, but there's no question that we're going to be seeing cumulative impacts from these kinds of chemicals, because some of them we already are, and we probably ought to get ready. So is that fair enough to say that the cumulative impact side of this is something that you realize has to be done?
This is not something we've had a lot of discussion about in leadership at DES, but it's certainly something we'd be interested in discussing. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Senator Altshuler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for taking my question. You had leaned heavily on Chapter 149M, and and that all the protections we could possibly need would be included there. And I would like to I'd like to point out in Chapter 149M, there's a space actually in Part 17 with the definition of public benefit, where I think given some of your discomfort with cumulative impacts might have a space to fit in there, because right in 149M, public benefit means the protection of the health, economy, and natural environment of the state of New Hampshire, consistent with 149M. And it would seem that cumulative impacts, would you agree or not agree, would be a way to define how we are looking at the protection of the health, economy, and natural environment?
Thanks for the question.
Sure.
Yeah, the public benefit criteria are actually very specific to facilities that need to obtain a standard permit from the department to operate. It's typically applied to landfills, waste energy facilities, and such. So this, an advanced recycling facility, even if we go back to before Senate Bill 367,
Yeah.
an advanced recycling facility basically occupies the regulatory space under 149M of what we call a permit exempt processing and treatment facility, which means they're not required to get a permit, which means they don't need to satisfy the public benefit criteria. So just structurally, it might not be a good match because it's not required under the statute. But I want to go to your question in a broader sense. I think you prefaced what you said by saying that the agency thought that all the protections needed were embodied under 149M. I'm saying the opposite of that, actually. The protections for any kind of a facility that's going to have air and water emissions or discharges are really embodied under the appropriate statutes in our air and water division. So, 125I and in the air division, and 45 and 45A under the water division. So there are other statutes that do provide those protections and do provide the regulatory framework for adequately regulating the emissions from those facilities. But these facilities, and even again, prior to Senate Bill 367 last year, the level of control on these facilities under 149M, really the statute just points to those other statutes. It says if you're going to operate a facility, a permit exempt processing and treatment facility, you need to make sure you're complying with all those other statutes. So to the extent we were going to do some kind of rulemaking that tried to tie all these together and look at cumulative impacts, much of that rulemaking would occur under those statutes, not under 149M. I guess what I'm just trying to say is 149M is sort of the wrong door to be knocking on for what I think this bill is trying to do.
Follow up?
Oh, sure.
So to solve the problem of knocking on the wrong door, maybe we just pivot and we go to the right door and acknowledge there's cumulative impacts, because when would you agree that when we were debating setting standards for PFAS, we had better information than we did 10 years prior, 5 years prior?
Absolutely.
And so every year that another state, like one of the 7 that have this facility now, or one of the 18 that are in the process of building, we could be learning from their experiences to get ahead of what could be a significant environmental impact on a very small state.
Well, I guess I'll preface what I say to say I'm not a toxicologist. That's not my area of expertise. But I think it's fair to say that even with knowing much more now about individual PFAS compounds than we did 10 years ago, we know very little at all about cumulative impacts, about synergistic impacts to the extent they exist between those compounds. So it becomes very difficult. It's easy to talk about it conceptually. Yeah, we really ought to have rules that address cumulative impacts. But when you get to actually making those rules, You really got to know what you're talking about. You've got to understand what you're trying to accomplish and what the risks are. And the problem is, for many chemicals, we don't understand that right now. So that's why I say it's a complex rulemaking, because in order to be fair to everybody and to make a rule that is actually accomplishes what we're trying to accomplish and is also the party who's regulated by it understands what it is they need to do to comply, you've got to be really very clear. Rulemaking is the hardest. People talk about it like, oh, it's, rulemaking is the hardest thing that we do. It's very difficult in many cases to make a rule that really hits the mark, doesn't have unintended consequences, and really accomplishes what you're trying to accomplish. And it's doubly hard when you don't have the science behind you to inform that. And that's kind of where we're at right now with many things. It doesn't mean we're not learning more new things every day. And again, I'm venturing out of my area of expertise because I'm not a toxicologist, but there's still a lot we have to learn with respect to understanding and then going to a point of actually forming rules to address the concept of cumulative impacts.
I'd also like to note that in the Air Division, we have an environmental health program that services the entirety, provides services to the entirety of DES, all the divisions. And as Mike alluded to, we have toxicologists, we have folks who are risk assessors, et cetera. And this is not just a New Hampshire conversation. This is a national conversation, this issue of cumulative impacts. And I do have staff who have been participating in some of these discussions, et cetera. We'd be happy to engage in that conversation, perhaps make some of those people available either for individual meetings or to provide information to this committee. But it is the concept of, we know what the risk from benzene is. We know what the risk from toluene is. We don't know what the risk of benzene and toluene together, or 6 or 7 different chemicals. And so this is an exceedingly complex area for us to be, particularly a small state with our resources. I think in our fiscal note, we mentioned that we'd need 1 staff just to kind of oversee and coordinate the entire rulemaking that would be necessary for this, because it touches upon so many areas: toxicology, risk, cumulative impacts, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we'd be happy to engage in that conversation. And I want to note, I think Massachusetts may have recently begun the process of promulgating an approach to determination of cumulative impacts. I'm not positive on that. Kathy's there. Stand up.
Kathy Beam,
I'm just going to ask that you introduce yourself, please.
Kathy Beam from the Air Resources Division.
Thank you.
Yes, so I believe New York and Massachusetts both have come up with some environmental justice regulations, and cumulative risk is one thing that Massachusetts has been looking at. They have some training later this week, and they're taking public comments. They haven't really gotten very far in the rulemaking, as I understand it.
Thank you.
My point is, it's a conversation that's come up. I think we're happy to try to provide as much information as we can, but it's very much an emerging area that would need a lot of attention. So,
thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, we thank you.
thank you.
So we have at least 13 more people that wish to speak, and we are probably going to run out of time on this today. So we want to try and get through as many of you as we can, because you've all made the trip here. So I'm going to ask everybody to really try and keep it to 1 or 2 minutes here, and just get your main points across and try not to repeat what others have said. And we'll do our best to get through the list before we run out of time. All right, next we'll have up Yvonne Schulman, who is in support of the bill and wishing to speak. Good morning.
Oh, thank you. I'm Yvonne Schulman from Bow, New Hampshire. I'm a veterinary pathologist and an associate editor of the oncology section of the Journal of Veterinary Pathology. As such, I am well aware of the role that environmental pollutants play in the development of cancer and other diseases across species. Advanced recycling, more accurately referred to as chemical recycling, produces a multitude of environmental pollutants, including highly toxic materials such as benzene and lead, which have been clearly demonstrated to cause adverse effects in humans and other animals. One of the key factors in the decision to move my young family to New Hampshire over 20 years ago was the relatively pristine nature of the environment in this state. In addition to attracting residents, the natural beauty of New Hampshire is what attracts the tourists, who spent over $5.5 billion in 2021, which resulted in more than $322 million in state revenue that year. If advanced recycling isn't properly regulated prior to operations, New Hampshire will end up with irreparable damage to the environment, which would have huge costs in terms of residents' health and may well affect tourism, hunting, and much more. So I strongly support SB 267 in order to give the DES the authority they apparently don't really want to enact regulations that protect the health of New Hampshire residents and our environment.
Thank you.
I'd just like to thank you for your attention and consideration.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Robert Dewey, who wishes to speak in support. Sorry, Dr. Robert Dewey. I saw the MD after. Welcome.
Good morning, Vice Chair and members that are still present. My name is Robert Dewey. I live in Bedford, New Hampshire, and I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 267. I'm a retired cardiologist, having practiced for over 30 years in Manchester at Catholic Medical Center, and I repeatedly observed over the years that my complex cardiac and pulmonary patients would become ill even in the presence of mild to moderate air pollution. And from this experience, it is clear to me that we really need to establish appropriate and precise rulemaking in advance before building these recycling facilities to protect the health of our New Hampshire citizens. These advanced recycling facilities we've heard earlier today are new. We don't know a lot about them. They're extremely controversial. But we do know one thing. They put out a lot of dangerous toxins, including benzene, mercury, lead, everything people have talked about. Taking a closer look at benzene, benzene is a known carcinogen, and it also causes suppression of the bone marrow that can lead to anemia, bleeding abnormalities, aplastic anemia, and leukemia in adults and children. Benzene is also present in gasoline and leaks out of gasoline storage tanks. And in fact, there are studies to show that children who live near filling stations have a higher risk of childhood leukemia. Now, filling stations put out 5 pounds of benzene per year, and it appears that these advanced recycling plants in the Midwest are permitted to put out between 16 and 20,000 pounds of benzene per year. And that difference, the magnitude there is really remarkable. And if you think 5 pounds per year is associated with childhood leukemia, what is 16 pounds per year going to do to an entire town? You're not going to be able to get into a safe place. So in closing, I do think it would be irresponsible, if not a dereliction of duty, for the state to allow construction of these facilities without very clear-cut rules and plans for monitoring what is a new technology. And finally, after the testimony today, it really seems that even DES says we don't really know much about these things. And so, you know, it might make sense even to just say, okay, let's figure it out before we build any. So we really do know. The worst thing we can do is let them be built and then scratch our heads and say, now what do we do? So anyway, I support Senate Bill 267. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Katie LaJoy? Yeah, she's here. Okay. 2 minutes?
Hello. Good morning. My name is Katie LaJoy. I'm a nurse from Charlestown. I will be emailing you my testimony. You'll have access to the links that way. I offer the following comments in support of SB 267. SB 267 provides regulatory authority for the Department of Environmental Services to assess cumulative impacts associated with pollution to air, water, and soil. And there's a link here to a report that group I'm involved with working on waste. We did a report on persistent toxic substances, and you can see the issue of cumulative impacts there. In August 2021, DES issued a notice of rulemaking regarding proposed changes to their New Hampshire's air toxic rules. And these rules implement RSA 1251, the Air Toxic Control Act. The rulemaking notice included an opportunity for public comment, and in response to a comment regarding persistent toxic substances and cumulative impacts, DES stated, with respect to evaluating the cumulative toxic effects of the emissions of multiple pollutants and the long-term accumulation of persistent toxic pollutants, the Act does not provide the Department a regulatory basis upon which to establish limits based on these parameters. SB 267 provides the regulatory basis, and assessing cumulative impacts is a crucial role for DES. And I would add that public health advocates in New Hampshire for at least 30 years have been urging DES to act on this issue. This is not a new issue for DES. SB 267 acknowledges the public health and environmental risks associated with facilities that process plastic waste. In a statement of purpose, SB 267 references, quote, the broad range of toxic pollutants, including PFAS, benzene, heavy metals, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that can be present in plastic materials. I urge correction in wording under paragraph 3 of the bill, undue risk of harm. Here there is reference to toxins, T-O-X-I-N-S. That word should be replaced with the word toxics. A toxin is a poison made by certain bacteria, plants, or animals, including insects. That's a quote from the National Cancer Institute. The pollutants listed above do not fall under that category. And a very important number 3, SB 267 provides an opportunity to revisit the seminal work of the International Joint Commission. And I do provide a link to their 7th biennial report. This is an especially important consideration as the IJC framework can help the committee understand the weakness of 267 with regard to assessing impacts. The IJC has concluded that persistent toxic substances are too dangerous to be released in any quantity. Persistent toxic substances include PFAS, certain heavy metals, and dioxin. It is insufficient to look at current rates of disease since current rates do not necessarily indicate safety. And the goal must be a reduction in disease. It is important to remember that advanced recycling is neither, in part because the plastics industry does not plan to decrease production of new plastics. Citing the need to stop plastic production in order to stop plastic pollution, Mongabay reports, quote, there are currently about 450 million tons of plastic produced each year, and the production is set to double by 2045. The American Chemistry Council misleads government officials and the public into believing its unproven technology can address the enormity of the problems associated with vastly expanding plastics production. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joan?
Hi, my name is Joan Widmer. I'm a registered nurse working in home health and hospice service here in New Hampshire. And I'm here to testify in support of SB 267 because a large number of the patient population we care for are patients who suffer from neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. There is now significant evidence that is linking neurodegenerative diseases to air pollution, in particular small particles such as PM 2.5, which are particles of 2.5 micron in diameter, and these particles enter through the bloodstream and also through the nasal passages and enter the olfactory bulb. One of the first and early signs of developing Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is a loss of smell, which is a result of damage to the olfactory bulb. Research has been done by a woman by the name of, sorry, I need to look at her name, Lillian Calderon Garcia Duenas. She examined 200 brains of individuals ages 11 months through 40 years, so you would admit young people who had died in the city of Mexico City. They found in these brains, in all but one, the early signs of the changes that we see when we examine the brains of individuals with Alzheimer's. So I would urge you to consider that these diseases take many, many years to develop. We have an opportunity here by watching how we emit these chemicals, which are known problems. You've heard other testimony about other problems. This is a new and evolving field, and it has an enormous cost to our society to care for individuals with these diseases. And we're better off looking at this now than waiting for the future to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. John? John Atherton?
Thank you for taking my testimony today. My name is John Michael Atherton. I live at 22 West Concord in Dover, New Hampshire. I urge you to support SB 267. Burning or using chemicals to alter plastics under any name the industry uses endangers our health, pollutes air and water, contaminates our soil, and becomes a billboard-sized invitation to other polluters to bring their dirty activities to New Hampshire. SB 267 simply asks the Department of Environmental Services, tasked to protect us and our environment, to do the job, to be free to do their job. Industrialists want to save money by releasing tons of carcinogens like benzene and toluene, you've heard, into the air that we breathe. Would you live next to a plant that discharges carcinogens into the air? Would you want your children or your friends to live downwind from that plant? If you say no, then how can you ask other families to do the same thing? And if you say yes, if you think that would be okay to live downwind, you haven't been paying attention. Once lead, for example, is released from the plants, enters your brain of you or your children, it can never be removed. Lead causes proven damage to our cognitive abilities for a lifetime. Any quantity of lead damages our body. As legislators, faced with passing laws to control dangerous products and processes, you should adopt the precautionary principles that is used widely throughout the European Union and Canada. This means we assume all unknown chemicals are dangerous until proven innocent. Not risk management, they have to prove their innocence. We need to use precaution because history shows us when we release dangerous chemicals into the population, it is tragically too late to help many people. Recall PFAS and the damages it causes to this day. We know nothing about the toxicity of a vast majority of the chemicals in plastics. We should require the chemicals and all processes connected to them to prove themselves safe before we allow industry to alter them and release their toxic fumes into the air we breathe. Precaution also dictates that we take care before dangers occur, because once they arise, New Hampshire will become it'll look foolish to the rest of the world for having naively accepted self-serving testimony from industry advocates. New Hampshire will look even worse because you are being warned repeatedly, in detail, and with supporting evidence that releasing toxic fumes from altering plastic stock through burning or chemicals will damage the health of New Hampshire citizens and our environment. Please protect our health, environment, and enhance the respect for New Hampshire by passing SB 267. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Thanks for being here.
Seeing none. Cynthia?
I have a few handouts. And there's a few extras, so please take a few extras if you'd like to share them. My name is Cynthia Walter from Dover, New Hampshire. I speak today as a retired biologist with 35 years experience teaching and research, mostly focused on pollution tracking and pollution reduction. I have a large PowerPoint to share with you in support of SB 267. I'm happy to speak with you at more length about this in detail, but here's the 2-minute version. Slide 1. We need special protections from new industries that convert plastic waste because they release, and the material itself contains especially hazardous chemicals. This is a special circumstance, and I appreciate the DES is caution and their overworked situation, but this is an all-hands-on-deck situation. By the way, we do have a facility in New Hampshire that has just started converting plastic waste into fuel. It's already here. So it's not proposed, it's here. So we are a target. Obviously, the target has arrived on spot. Go to Groveton and you'll see it. We're the only state in New England to designate advanced recycling as manufacturing. The 2022 law allows, quote unquote, incidental products to be used as fuel to actually burn within the facility. This can be as much as 50% of the plastic waste stock. Plastic waste is not very usable material. So what you call incidental, from a technical point of view, is not small. It means it's not your preferred product. So the word incidental is very problematic in legislation. Slides 3. Toxic. I have all citations. All of my references, all of my citations are peer-reviewed science and government documents. I'm citing nothing from other groups. So slide 3. Toxics occur at every step in converting plastic waste, including dioxins, the most toxic substance ever known to humans are dioxins, and they're coming out of these facilities. Now, item 4, harmful substances that we know impacts all the body parts we've just heard before. Let's move on to slide 5. New Hampshire regulations are currently lacking. Let's look at a very carefully scrutinized 2021 permit for St. Gobain. It allows 100,000 pounds of VOCs. Those are things that can that have direct impacts on those cardiology patients we just heard about, direct impacts, and also they trigger ozone, which also scars and damages your lungs. Also, they allow 20,000 pounds of any single hazardous air pollution. That includes benzene, something for which we know we have great models to exactly predict the cumulative impacts of benzene from facility A, B, C, and D in one airshed. We know this. We can predict that. So if nothing else, we could do cumulative impacts on benzene. Item 6, permits from other states show serious pollution such as benzene. And I've got all the lists coming from those facilities targeted to know they are going to be releasing benzene. Item 7, air pollutants from plastic conversion impact all the ages, old and young, including those in the womb, including our drinking water. So that will impact our private and city wells, and be very hard for private well owners to test for these compounds. Slide 8. Large amounts of air pollutants, up to 200,000 pounds per year, are coming out of these conditions, and they trigger the ozone, as I said before. Item 9. Likely scenario, New Hampshire. The current permits would allow the advanced recycling facility to release those 20,000 pounds of benzene, and we just heard about the gas station and how your cancer risk increases. This is common knowledge, and you can see the visuals in that slide. Item 10, the cost to develop new rules is worth it. DES estimated without this addition of the amendment to include plastic waste to fuel, they said, well, gee, to do the one kind of series of regulations, we need to hire a person for about 3 years. That's about $300,000 or a little bit less. Okay, that seems like a big number. How about $27 million? How does that number sound? That's how much my town had to pay to fix its water supplies. Just fix them, just slightly upgrade them. And then if you look at, what about cancer? $100,000 for one person to be treated for leukemia. And guess what? Only 30% of them survive. 70% of those leukemia victims we know are linked to benzene are going to die. Can we continue with the idea that we can't do this yet? Every part of SB 267 is part of a network of protection, and we need that protection now. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Seeing none. Kirsten. Representing the BIA.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch. I'm Director of Public Policy for the Business and Industry Association, known as BIA. I come before you today to register BIA's opposition to Senate Bill 267. We find that this bill could prevent advanced recycling facilities from doing business in the state of New Hampshire. It's not about adjusting regulations, it's about preventing advanced recycling facilities from doing business. Senate Bill 267 would establish regulatory roadblocks that would make it unlikely for advanced recycling facilities to pass through the permitting process. In addition, the bill establishes a moratorium on permitting for advanced recycling facilities. Last year, Senate Bill 367 was passed by both bodies of the legislature and even signed into law by the governor. This bill established regulatory certainty for advanced recycling facilities. It was also thoroughly reviewed by both bodies, and in the process was amended heavily by the Department of Environmental Science Services to ensure the proper safeguards were in place to protect New Hampshire's health, safety, and the environment. We believe it's important to leave that to the experts to decide. And we believe with the proper safeguards already established by Senate Bill 367 as signed into law last year, that the state should continue to welcome sustainable manufacturers with this technology in order to divert hard-to-recycle plastics from going into New Hampshire landfills and begin developing a more robust recycling market. If passed, this bill would signal that New Hampshire is not open to the recycling business. In conclusion, BIA respectfully asks the committee to find this bill inexpedient to legislate. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Waters.
Yeah. Thank you, and good to see you, and thanks for coming in. Not exactly a non sequitur, but I'm just curious, in the BIA, is there discussion about, how do they manage the discussions of risk for pollution? In that, we see what lead, we see what asbestos, we're seeing the landfills, the PFAS, just in our state, St. Cobain's, and a lot of companies have gone bankrupt. Now it's 3M with PFAS and the drug industry and so on. So I'm just curious as to how the BIA has a conversation about the potential unknown risks here that, okay, you may come into the state in this business, but guess what, down the road, it's not just you, but a lot of other entities that might be on the hook for these unknown chemicals. So what kind of caution does that produce in your conversations?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And this is something, we talk about a lot with our members. We just believe that when it comes to regulations, that they're best designed by the experts. And we want to see DES make the right decision. We want a science-based decision. And whatever protections that we need to keep, the health and safety and the environment of the state where it needs to be, we support. We just want a science-based approach. We want DES to do that. We don't want it we don't want these regulations written by the legislature. We want science-based rules made by the experts.
Follow up?
Yeah, if I may, again, it's just, I think what's tough being legislators, we're responsible for policy and the public good, right? And so that, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that, if you look at where we are with certain chemicals, that perhaps the scientific process in our agencies actually wasn't able to do the work that they needed to do, or weren't able to do it in a way that protected the public. So while we're not scientists, that in terms of the range of public policy, that sometimes we have to set the agenda, don't we?
Well, I agree that it is a policy decision. However, I think if there was concern here, that DES would have probably then come in support of this bill.
Thank you.
No further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Julia? Julia, are you here? Is anybody by the name of Julia in the room? Okay, well, that settles that. Yeah, I see that. It's important to mark one way or the other. Okay, let's see. How about Clark?
It's okay. I think everyone can hear me. I'll speak up. It's difficult for me to move from here.
Okay, just turn on the mic. Yep.
I must say first, the acoustics in this room are no better than they were in 1970 when I started lobbying here. I'm 79 years old. I now live in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and I drove up here this morning for 2 minutes of testimony. Thank you. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. But I respect so much the testimony that I've heard here this morning. I very much doubt, Senators, that the American Chemistry Council, when they hired a bunch of lobbyists last year, had in mind the quality of New Hampshire as a tourist state. Air, water, soil. I have an enormous amount of respect for Mike Limsat, and I want you to know that. I knew his father, who was the first director of the sweepstakes. I knew his brother, who was a district chief of the Fish and Game Department, and I have had numerous conversations with Mike. His boss is Commissioner Scott. Commissioner Scott was appointed by Governor Sununu, the same governor who vetoed the 500 setback last year on the Dalton situation. One doesn't have to be a rocket scientist to understand the politics behind anyone that opposes this bill. That doesn't mean that I know anything about advanced recycling, because I don't. I don't know anything about the Northern Pass, but it's patently clear to me that those people in positions of expertise in the public marketing of colloquialisms, such as Northern Pass, sounds like an environmental thing to me, but it isn't. Advanced recycling sounds good. We don't know diddly about plastic. We really don't. I would just like to read you one sentence. This was a question I asked of the Assistant Director of Public Works for the City of Keene. His name is Duncan Watson. His brother is Robert Watson. Robert Watson is the father of LEEDS. LEEDS is an acronym for the Leading Engineering Environmental Design. He is one of the 25 most distinguished graduates from Dartmouth College and is so recognized internationally as such. He typed this to me yesterday. It's only one sentence. My brother and I agree with regard to the concept of advanced plastics recycling. It's early yet. We're sure that it will work for certain types of plastic. Others are better recycled mechanically or in hybrid situations, or a combination thereof. Anything regarding plastics recycling should be viewed through a skeptical lens, given the massive scam of recycling symbols on the bottom of every plastic container. And if any of you recycle and you look at that little triangle, half of the triangle is missing in a number of them, made in China. Anything regarding plastics recycling should be viewed through a skeptical lens, given the massive scam of the recycling symbol on the bottom of every plastic container, implying the product is recyclable. The devil is in the details. I laid on the ground in Vietnam for 11 months and 18 days in 1967. I don't know what's in my brain, but I can tell you there's a couple molecules of common sense left. And in the sake of New Hampshire, be in New Hampshire, I ask you, don't kill this bill. I don't care if you send it to study. I heard the commissioner, I heard Mike's comments, and I can see where he's coming from. This bill may need work. When you, Senator, introduced an amendment this morning, I wasn't aware that you were going to. I was happy with the bill the way it was written. But I am totally in favor of the bill as written and ask you to seriously consider why you have the esteemed position of sitting there and determining public policy going forth for every kid in this state. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Seeing none? John? You didn't sign up whether you're going to speak or not? John Tootle?
No, thank you, not
All right. Heidi Trimolero, CLF. Trimaraco? Correct me. It's Heidi. I got that right.
Good morning. Heidi Tremarco for the Conservation Law Foundation. And I tried to use my neatest handwriting on the
Thank you.
form, but I always...
The problem lies here. It's always me.
I always struggle with making it clear. So I do have copies of our testimony. So thank you to the chair and the committee. And I did understand the instructions that we are down to 1 minute of testimony, so I will make it.
Yeah, they're going to kick us out here at 12 o'clock too, so.
I'll make it very quick.
Yeah.
As you've already heard from the other, you've heard a lot of support for the bill, and CLF is here to offer our strong support for this bill, which we see as really a natural progression of the passage of SB 367. And so SB 367 paves the way for advanced recycling, and it does say that those facilities should be regulated and protected by our air and water regulations. And so what we need here is the rules to, we need DES to engage in the rulemaking to protect the environment and the public health. And you've heard a lot of that expressed here from the scientists and the medical experts, so I won't repeat that. But we do have references in our testimony to the EPA's positions on some of the risks that you get from these advanced recycling facilities. And so hopefully that will be a helpful resource. As you've heard, the facilities do emit significant toxic pollutants, but I think what's been really compelling, what we've heard today, especially from DES, is that we don't fully understand this process. The EPA doesn't fully understand the process. And you heard from DES that it would be putting the cart before the horse, but respectfully, it would be putting the cart before the horse to permit these facilities before we have the rulemaking. We need to make the guardrails and put those in place before we permit the facilities. And so doing the rulemaking and having a moratorium until those rules are in place makes a lot of sense. It makes sense to protect the public health and the environment, and it also is the right investment. There will be cost savings in investing in the rulemaking up front and then permitting the facilities, as opposed to the example we learned with PFAS, where we have a lot of PFAS in the environment, a lot of manufacturing, especially at St. Gobain, and then you have to go back and engage in emergency rulemaking, and try to remediate the water and try to figure out how best to protect the public health after everybody's been exposed to PFAS. The same goes for the cumulative impacts. We heard from DES that that's an exceedingly complex process. I think the same logic applies. This is something that we've heard from DES. It sounds like we need to do, and it's been recognized as really important. So let's do it. Let's engage in that in the rulemaking to get to understanding cumulative impacts and do that up front before those impacts begin accumulating, and then study them after the fact. We do support the amendment that came forth this morning that would kind of close a loophole in the original version of the bill and capture the facilities that even if their primary product is fuel. I think that amendment makes a lot of sense. And I think for the rest of it, I'll just rest on the comments that we handed out.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Dr. Robert Sutter.
Esteemed members of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, my name is Bob Fader. I have lived in Hollis, New Hampshire for 39 years. I'm a physician, and I practiced medicine in Nashua and Manchester for that same length of time. I'm here today to testify in favor of Senate Bill 267. There are many things we do know about advanced recycling, and even more things we don't know. We do know that in the process of advanced recycling, plastics of all types are treated with heat and chemicals, and that in that process, significant amounts of the following compounds can be released into the environment and not recycled at all: benzenes, dioxins, lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. We do know that environmental benzene is a significant cause of asthma and other lung diseases. We do know that environmental benzene and dioxins have been linked to increased cancer rates. We do know that environmental lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium cause dementia and other neurologic diseases, which I have seen tragic examples of during my medical career. What we don't know is how many other potentially harmful compounds could be put into the environment when plastics of any type are processed in this way. What we also don't know is how advanced recycling will be regulated to ensure that the people of our state are not exposed to these multiple harmful substances. Unfortunately, advanced recycling has already been given the go-ahead in New Hampshire, with absolutely no safety structure around it. Senate Bill 267 will put a rulemaking process in place for the permitting and operation of advanced recycling facilities to help ensure that they are as safe as possible. We've heard testimony today from DES that this bill will create a lot of hard work for them, and they're opposed to it for that reason. Well, isn't that the whole reason for DES's existence, to do this hard work to protect the people of New Hampshire? Is there any amount of work that's too much to protect the health of our citizens? Please support Senate Bill 267 and help keep New Hampshire the beautiful and safe place that God has given us. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Christine Barber?
I'm Christine Baber from Dover, New Hampshire, and thank you, Chairman and honorable members of the committee, for hearing our testimony today. I came here this morning to speak in support of SB 267, thinking that this bill would enact important safety protections not incorporated in the original legislation, RSA 149. listening to the expert and compelling testimony this morning makes me feel that it is even more critical. We have heard the risks associated with the potential impact of what chemical and plastic industries have labeled advanced recycling. And we have heard a bit of implied criticism about the name of this concept. We would like to think that there is safe advanced recycling. Does not appear to be the case, as documented by what we have heard and the testimony that has been given to you. There is a significant amount of evidence, scientific evidence, that's been provided to you this morning that this approach to dealing with waste plastic is another way of introducing toxic pollutants into our air, soil, water, and our bodies. I don't have any expertise on advanced recycling, but have done a fair amount of research on the problem with plastics. And we know that, and it's documented that microparticles of plastic itself, with the toxins they carry, are already found in our bodies, in our water bodies. Research from UNH has documented this. And we have heard this morning that, as we've learned from our experience with PFAS, we need to be as proactive as possible in trying to protect our state and our residents. So making rules in regard to advanced recycling, since at this point we have a bill that permits such facilities. Making rules in regard to this before the licensing of facilities occurs is critical. It's critical not only to protect public health, but also to protect the state and its residents from other, including economic potential costs, as we've heard from Cynthia Walter this morning in her testimony, of dealing with unintended negative impacts resulting from this process. And I think we've heard testimony from a number of people, including DES, that says we don't know. We do not know what the unintended impacts might be, particularly cumulative risks. SB 267 and the amendments it offers to RSA 149 will seek to address not only the toxic pollutants that might result from this process, but also the cumulative impacts of these toxins. Yes, it will be hard work, but I think we've also heard testimony that we must do this work. Another piece that I appreciate is the inclusion of a meaningful way of including public participation in the permitting process. I think we have heard just this morning, just in the short period of time, the contributions that the public can make. So I think it is important to continue including us in this process. I was moved by Senator Altshuler's opening questions. Will we learn? We must learn to protect our state and its citizens. We have an opportunity. There are people willing and ready to participate in any way in this process. I respectfully ask that you support this bill and send it forward with an ought to pass vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next, we'll call on Bonnie Christie, who supports the bill and wishes to speak.
Thank you very much, Senator Pearl. And I just want to open by saying that I really appreciate the friendly atmosphere in this committee hearing where all of us can express ourselves. And I always learn a lot when I come to these hearings, especially when I hear something that's different from where I'm coming from. So my name is Bonnie Christie. I'm from Hopkinton. I'm on the Waste Reduction Committee. I chair that committee in our town. I'm on the Conservation Commission, and I'm also on the Joint Committee with Webster for our refuse disposal. So I'm not speaking for any of those groups, but I just point that out to show my areas of interest and expertise. I support this bill, and I urge you to vote OTP on it. I'm a signatory on the excellent letter that was drafted by our plastics working group in the New Hampshire Network for Environment, Energy, and Climate. And I think Dr. Cynthia Walter, who we heard from earlier, had a lot to do with that. And she's got all the scientific details. So I signed on to that one. And I do agree with last year's Bill 367 that stated in its purpose, New Hampshire is committed to a clean environment and protection of its natural resources. And then again this year in 267, statement of purpose to protect the state of New Hampshire from toxic pollutants, PFAS, benzene, heavy metals, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, that we establish some helpful rulemaking so that we can be protected from those things. A couple of things I want to touch on that I don't think anybody else has touched on here is that reuse and recycling are important components of the state's waste management hierarchy, which I think has been in place for about 38 years. But from my perspective, I don't see advanced recycling as recycling. To me, it's incineration because it's pyrolysis, it's solvosis, it's all those things that create high temperatures and emissions associated with that. So I'm concerned that on a second point, the widespread use of AR would defeat the goals of New Hampshire's Solid Waste Management Plan, which was just released last November. And I know Senator Waters was involved in creating the group that put that plan together a couple years ago. I think those goals are really important. I would hope that we wouldn't pass any legislation that undermines something that another branch of government is doing. And my third point is that I predict that advanced recycling would have a negative impact on the communities it would likely be established in, which would fall into the category of environmental justice communities, and that has been touched on a bit. I will submit most of my comments to the committee in an email, but I just wanted to say that addressing this state plan for waste management, and I do understand that last year it became settled law that AR is not considered recycling and solid waste management. However, the feedstock materials that come in to make this possible, they are waste. So the first goal of New Hampshire's plan that just came out in November is to reduce New Hampshire's waste load. Because we know that close to 50% of that waste load comes from out of state. And the second goal of the plan is to reduce the toxicity of New Hampshire's waste stream. We've already discussed ad nauseum here the many impacts of the toxics that are involved in advanced recycling. A mandate under existing law, RSA 149M229, is to support the state solid waste management hierarchy. And I just mentioned that. This sort of flips that hierarchy on its head if you look at it from a practical viewpoint. So that undermines the statute. And my final concern is that the New Hampshire Solid Waste Management Plan goal number 7 is to ensure that solid waste policies and regulations support state and federal environmental justice initiatives. Now, I'm pretty sure that advanced recycling, if it's established with inadequate regulatory structure, will find its way into our most vulnerable communities. And I bring attention to something that is called a pilot program in Groveton, New Hampshire, and the company is called Prima America. It's a bit mysterious. It's hard to find out much about them, but I know from the news articles I read, they call themselves a local company, but they're registered as a foreign profit corporation with a mailing address in New Jersey, and all the principals appear to be Chinese. This is a typical environmental justice scenario where a vulnerable community is found, and Groveton is such a vulnerable community. It has a poverty rate of 17% compared to Nashua, wherever else you are from. Nashua, Hopkinton, my town, our poverty rate is 0.2%. Loudon's is 7.1%. So Groveton is a very vulnerable community. They lost their jobs when the paper industry went out. I grew up in Lancaster, which is the adjacent town, so I know how bad that was. And I understand that Prima America has an air quality permit from DES, and I would be interested to know what is permitted for emissions in that air quality permit. And I just wanted to read you a quote from the director of that company, Prima America, from CEX. It says, "It's a pilot project that currently is 10 years in the making. The owners, who are unnamed silent investors, who I think are from China, have big plans for old oil refineries around the world. We can take all the plastic, Boston, New York, Miami, all the plastic on the East Coast and bring it here," Bisson said. That really worries me. At the same time that we have a goal of reducing our waste load of what's coming into the state by 45% by 2050, we're talking about businesses that would import huge loads of waste as feedstocks to their manufacturing process. So I urge you to vote OTP, and thank you very much for taking my statement.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. John Gage, who supports the bill. John, I got to ask you, keep it to about a minute or so here. We have two more bills that we need to get through today before noon, so I'm going to have to keep it clamped down pretty good if we can.
Well, this isn't about climate, so that shall be easy for me.
All right, thank
you. John Gage from Windham, representing myself. I agree with everything that everybody who supports this bill has said. Thank you, senators, for introducing it. I have a biology degree, and I would just like you to take a look at unknowns as something that we shouldn't just ignore until we know there's a problem. We should use proper risk management and consider things hazardous until we know better. I think our state has not a great history of opening our doors to business, but in particular to polluters. Saint-Gobain, DuPont moved from Vermont to New Hampshire because we had laxer pollution laws about PFAS, and the company and scientists knew that it was dangerous, and now we are suffering enormous consequences from those dangers, and this is preventable. As somebody who has had cancer, somebody who's worried about other people getting it, we need to reduce our risks, not ignore pollution and just hope for the best, and then when we find that people are dying, try to do something to recover. So I just want to support this bill, and thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you, John. If you have any further comments you want to bring, please make sure you email them in. I appreciate you, your brevity on this. Any questions for John before we go? No? All right. Our last speaker is Jody Grimbliss, who opposes the bill. I'm going to ask the same of you, Jody. Please try and keep it to a minute or so. Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Jody Grimbliss, and I am here representing the American Chemistry Council. It's a national trade association of chemical and plastic manufacturers, including member companies in New Hampshire. Over 96% of the manufactured goods are impacted by the business of chemistry, making it an essential part of the nation's economy. We were very involved last year with Senate Bill 367, a bill to clarify that regulatory status of advanced recycling facilities. It was a bipartisan bill. Senator Waters will remember that we amended it in the Senate to make sure we addressed the concerns and the needed regulatory requirements of DES. It was approved on a bipartisan vote in the Senate. In the House, we had 3 subcommittees. We had some of the kind of testimony we heard here today, including, testimony from CLF and some others, we worked on multiple amendments, and it ended up being passed by the House on 198 to 128 division vote. 21 states, including the most recent, the state of Michigan, have adopted similar laws to New Hampshire, treating advanced recycling facilities as they are under those current laws, manufacturers, not solid waste facilities. The concern we have is that this is kind of a repeat of last year's debate. Is there enough regulation? And we believe the answer is yes. And we believe that because we worked so hard with the legislature and DES to make sure that these facilities were given the clear review in terms of federal laws, state laws, permitting requirements, etc., as other manufacturers in the state. The reason for advanced recycling is, again, innovations in recycling. It's not totally new. I mean, I think on your handout you'll see Wendy's drink cups are made with advanced recycling, plastics, herbal essence, shampoo and conditioner bottles, Warby Parker glasses, the frames. So as more companies and manufacturers look to have more recycled content in their products, they're turning to this type of technology. Lastly, I'm very glad about the conversation I heard earlier about the definition and the questions about cumulative impacts, because I spent all weekend looking through DES rules trying to find out what cumulative impacts were, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So it wasn't a term I was able to find even in the solid waste rules. So again, I think I understand the issue there of looking at cumulative impacts. Maybe that is something that, again, I think from the department's testimony needs to be continued to be looked at and reviewed. But again, we'd probably look to see that it should apply to all manufacturers, not just one single group.
Thank you.
That's it.
Any questions? Seeing none?
Thank you.
So that is all the names I have. Anybody else wishing to speak? I'm going to recess this hearing 267 at this point. And, sorry?
Recess or end?
We're going to actually recess it. Senator Avard, Chairman Avard asked me to recess it until next, he didn't say till when, so he asked me to recess it, so that's what I'm going to do. For reasons you'll have to inquire with him. So with that, we're going to recess Senate Bill 267.
So we're going to have another dozen people testify next week?
That may be, I don't know.
Okay.
And my apologies on that. I think. To a time certain?
Don't we have to do it at a time certain?
He did not give me that, so I'm at a little bit of a loss. He just asked me to recess it, and so that's what
you did it. You did it. You did very well, too. That's what a vice chair should do. It's like vice president. What do I do?
He didn't give me the reason why. Okay. Well,
yeah, so Deborah.
I'll give it just a second.
Yeah, I wanted to ask them.
Oh, thank you.
This bill's going to hurt you. This bill's going to hurt you. Right. I mean, we'll get 3 to 2 against it. So what I thought was wondering.
All right, we're going to move on to Senate Bill 229, and I'm going to ask Senator Birdsell to introduce, since Senator Bradley is not able to attend. Senator Birdsell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for hearing Senate Bill 229. I'm speaking for Senator Bradley. For the record, my name is Regina Birdsell, State Senator for District 19, encompassing the towns of Derry, Hampstead, and Windham. 229 analysis. This bill makes various changes to the administration of certain wetland permits by the Department of Environmental Services.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to call on John. I'm sorry, I can't read your last name, from New Hampshire DOT. Is John here? This is 228, yes. Oh, did I say 229? My apologies. I got the sheet for 228 in front of me. Hold on just 1 second. I have the wrong sheet given to me. My apologies. They're too close and I didn't catch it. Sorry, John. We'll call you up on the next bill. How do you pronounce your last name? How do you pronounce your last name?
Oh, Corcoran.
Corcoran. All right, I got it. Okay, how about we do 229 this time? We will, is Senator Waters gone? I guess he did. All right. We'll do Phil Trowbridge from New Hampshire DES. Good morning.
Good morning. You've had a busy morning, so I will be brief in my remarks. For the record, my name is Phil Trowbridge. I work at the Department of Environmental Services, where I oversee the land-based permitting programs for wetlands permitting, shoreland permitting, subsurface septic systems permitting, and also alteration of terrain programs. Collectively, that is called the Land Resource Management Programs. Thank you for this opportunity to testify regarding House Bill, Senate Bill 229. The department supports this bill because it fixes several small issues in the statutes regarding the permitting programs that I oversee that create ambiguity and sometimes difficulty for applicants. The programs that I oversee issue 10,000 permits a year. The vast majority of those go smoothly, but because we see so many of them, there are occasionally instances where something is a little bit challenging for the applicant. We keep track of that, and we think about fixes we might need to do with the statute, because obviously we can't waive statutory requirements. And we work on ways to resolve those ambiguities and add steps for process or remove steps that are no longer needed. This bill is a collection of these fixes. There are 6 parts of the bill. The first 2 parts pertain to the alteration of terrain program. And one of them, they will clarify how to calculate fees for amendments and allow applicants to request more time to fulfill their application. The third and fourth parts of the bill pertain to the Shoreland Protection Statute. One change reinforces the legislative intent that DES has the authority to regulate accessory structures regardless of the size. And the other is just a cross-referencing correction. The fifth part of the bill pertains to the wetland statute. This change makes it easier in the rare cases when you have an applicant applying for a property that spans 2 municipalities and allows them just to provide their application to one of the municipalities. Finally, the 6th part of the bill pertains to the repair and replacement in kind of septic systems. It clarifies what the term domestic sewage means. It would require that applicants submit prior state approvals up front before doing the work. And this may sound like extra work for the applicant, but our experience is that a significant number of applicants run into problems if they use this process and they don't have the prior state approvals. And later they find out that they're not eligible. Asking for this information up front helps the applicant avoid this problem. And the bill adds some flexibility as to the source of the approved plan that they can provide. So there's, across all these 6 changes, they have some things in common. First, they're purely administrative. They do not reduce or expand environmental protections. They make it easier for applicants to get permits, and they will not increase costs for applicants or state, municipal, or local governments. So thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Rep. Mark, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, illustrious senators seated here. Record, my name is Mark McConkey. In my real world job, I'm a septic designer, installer, water operator, and so forth. And there is a provision in the administrative rules subsurface that if someone had a septic design that it was approved and had an operational approval, and a number of years later, their septic system were to fail, then they could bypass the full design process and be able to build what they had in kind. But there had to be plans in hand to do that. There had to be an inspection so that people weren't abusing the laws they did for a number of years. I've had several instances where some of the documentation is missing. And the State Archives had an issue a number of years ago with water seeping into their cabinets, and we lost, I'm going to say hundreds, I believe it's even more than that. And through no fault of the homeowner, they weren't able to go through this process. So I think this streamlines it, it makes it better, and it's advantageous for homeowners and not having to pay the expense of a design, which in my area now runs in the neighborhood of $3,000. That's all I have to say. I'd asked Senator Bradley if he could bring it forward, and I'm happy that him and DES were able to put some housekeeping issues together. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Waters, you want to talk?
Are you ready for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you open the hearing? You closed this one yet?
Oh, it's the same.
What's the next bill?
229. You're signed up to speak.
I think that's a mistake. This is the next one.
228?
I think that's just a mistake.
I'll put him on here.
Yeah.
On 228, okay, so
Yeah.
we're on 229, right?
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
speak to camera.
we've had this.
Okay. All right. Seeing that, nobody else is wanting to speak on this, we'll close the hearing. 229.
I mean, it's like impromptu remarks.
No, we're good at that.
This is 221. They already gave me this one by mistake the first time, and I still
All right, so now we're on 228.
Nick, do they have the amendment? I've got more copies.
I just recessed it. I didn't do a time specific. Do we have to do that?
No, just to call the chair.
I just recessed it.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure what you wanted to do, so I left it there.
No, it's good because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And I know a couple of the other speakers could be long. Senator Waters, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator David Waters, District 4, here to introduce Senate Bill 228 relative to the Hilton Park boat ramp. I have a replace all amendment for you, and I will speak to that. Just a little bit of background in this situation. For decades, there was a dock and functioning boat ramp at Hilton Park, which if you're driving down towards Portsmouth on Route 4 and Route 16, you go over the Little Bay bridges and you look down towards the left and there's Hilton Park, a great historic property and place that a lot of people have visited for forever. And it used to have a functioning dock there so people could bring their boats up and go fishing or the pleasure boats, and also the boat ramp too, so people could launch boats there as well. That fell into disrepair, and the dock was torn down a number of years ago. The boat ramp was still there and functioning, but there was a lot of interest in Dover and the surrounding communities to have a functioning facility again. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was a lot of conversation around this, in part provoked or sparked by the Dover Police Department, which has a boat that does water rescues up to Cochico, and they didn't really have a place where they could offload someone that there'd be an ambulance could have access there, or a dock where they could offload somebody. So, and then also the fact that we had lost the facility for people to use when the dock was taken down. Now, at that point in time, as you may recall, we were doing the Little Bay Bridges project, and so we looked at how something might get done in that context, but it seemed best to wait until after the bridges were constructed. Now, the situation that's in front of us is that the land that is there is actually owned by the DOT. Around the state, Fish and Game generally runs boat ramps and docks. So, because DOT under federal regulations have to get a fair market value for that land, there would have to be funding so that Fish and Game could purchase the property. And then there would be the question of how do you build a facility, how do you pay for it, what do you build, and then how is it managed, and what are the regulations around that management. So I was asked by Dover to look at this issue. Again, had a lot of great conversation with DOT, particularly with Director Mason of Fish and Game. And what we came up against was that, yes, there might be some money through federal coastal improvements legislation that's been passed under the last couple of bills, that there might be some funding there that could provide for the purchase of the property and its transfer. There might be some funding there as well for the construction of a facility and at least the repair of the ramp. But the problem we ran into is that for Fish and Game to run it, there are requirements in terms of parking so that people can park after they've launched their boat at the ramp. There are issues about whether or not such a docking facility, if it's built with public funds, could be used for a commercial purpose, such as the oyster farmers in the Great Bay having a place to offload there instead of going over to Newington. And, a variety of other issues. So what I was convinced, and why you see this bill before you now amended, to have a study of this, that what we really do need to do is to get together these parties and see what we can do. There's a lot of conversation with the federal delegation. They're very much willing to work on the funding report. But we've got to see what we might be able to do to accommodate the needs here. One particular thing I want to add to note here is that it also opens the door to the inclusion of Pease Development Authority in this study, and that's because there's been conversation with Pease Development Authority, which has has the capacity to run and manage facilities, so that it might be a way of avoiding the difficulties. If Fish and Game ran it, then there would be a lot of problems about whether or not anybody could park there in the area anymore, because it would be reserved for these things. So if another entity was willing to come forward, perhaps take on the funding that comes in, the construction, the management, that this might be a help to us. Pease Development Authority stepped up. This doesn't serve, it's not just Dover I'm talking about. This is Newington, Greenland, Rochester, really Somerville, Rollinsford, anybody that wants access to the Bay, let alone Durham, let alone people that are all around the state who would like to have some facility there. Sorry to go on so long. It's complicated. It has become a simple bill to create this study. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony and for talking about the amendment. That's how we got the peer as far as we did for Hampton Beach. We started off with a study, then a feasibility study, and now that's how we're at. So it's how the process works. But will this be handicap accessible by any chance?
That's feasible access on the American Disabilities Act, 16 to 17.
I didn't read that part. Okay, good. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank
questions
you.
from the committee? Seeing none. And we have, who else do we have here? Which one am I? Oh, wrong slip. We don't want that one. We want this one. Okay, John? Now that we know it's a study, should it pass?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is John Corcoran. I'm a Turnpike Bureau Administrator and represent the New Hampshire DOT. The department didn't approve or oppose the bill, but we just have one concern of how it was written regarding to the necessary repairs of the existing boat ramp. The department has an existing MOU with Fish and Game, and in that they're responsible for the operation and maintenance of the boat ramp. We feel per the MOU that they should still be maintaining the boat ramp. We don't have any funds allocated to maintain the existing boat ramp. Besides that, we would be involved with the study and be part of this and selling of the property too if needed.
Okay.
That concludes my testimony.
Great. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Garrett? What do you think about a study?
Studies are always good, unless you know all the answers, and no one does. So
that's why we
studies
study
are good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Bovard and
members of the committee, for allowing me to testify today. For the record, my name is Garrett Grasskamp. I am the coordinator of the state public boat access program, which is inside the Fish and Game Department. Let's see. I wrote testimony regarding the original bill, but I made a recommendation, or the department made a recommendation at the end of that testimony to do exactly that, to have a study committee.
Now that's service.
Trying to get ahead of the game.
Yeah.
But I did want to bring up some points which I think underscore why a study is appropriate. I looked over the coastline on Google Earth, and then also just my experience driving around the coast and looking at boat ramps over the years. I've been with Fish and Game for 8.5 years now in this capacity. This property is probably the last appropriate property that's owned by the state, that's not under conservation, that is at an elevation above what will probably be impacted by sea level rise for development to get onto our coastal waters. So it is a very special property in that regard, and in that light, we feel that it should be evaluated in that special capacity. It's also right off a major highway, Route 4. It's within the greater Portsmouth area economic zone. So there's opportunities here also to promote business, commercial aspects, and recreational boating. So it's more of a complex situation than what it was back when it was originally built. Actually, probably when it was originally built, you know, everything took place there. Fishermen went out in the 1800s, 1700s, whenever it was started, and they would, you know, ply their wares, and people who just wanted to get out on the water would potentially go out in that location also. So just wanted to say that transportation and its special characteristics topographically make it a special opportunity that the state really should assess comprehensively to get the best purpose out of it. Our funding sources, the boat access program gets funding from two sources: a federal source under the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program, and from a $5 surcharge that is applied to all boat registrations in the state. Those are motorized boats. Currently, the paddle boards and, you know, people who don't have an engine on their boat don't have to register, although last year a bill was passed where we will be able to accept donations from that constituency, and that will be put into effect later this year as we pursue the rulemaking on that. These two sources of income, the federal and the state, are restricted to recreational boating, not even actually fishing, but recreational boating. And if there are conflicts with that purpose, especially on the federal side, we can lose our funding from that. You know, they can say, well, you're not using the money appropriately, you're using it inappropriately, and we're going to penalize you for that. You have to repay the federal government back for those mistakes. Just this past year, because we have conflicts, since I've been here 8 years, we were putting out special details on the weekends at our 5 largest ramps, Winnipesaukee, Winnisquam, Squam, so forth, with COs on the weekends, and not even a full day. But this past June, the federal government came and said, you know, you can't do that anymore. You can't use federal funds to pay for law enforcement to manage those properties. That's not a use that's within that purview of that money. So they are looking over our shoulders and can inspect us at any time and take money away, which would be a problem since we'd have to pay it back. Wouldn't just be a stop now, it'd be, oh, go back in time. We use the state money to leverage the federal money at a ratio of 75% federal money for 25% state money as a match. So potentially one idea would be to
change the rules in the state so that state money could be used for commercial purposes and then just fund this property with state funds. That would require a change in the law, in state law. But I think the detriment would occur in that it would reduce the flexibility and the capability of the program to address the overall objectives that the program is trying to complete with having more and more boat ramps across the state. Right now, we have only 135 sites out of probably 400 or 500 sites across the state that are managed by municipalities or utilities or special interests. The fish and game sites are public. They're truly public by definition, and in the law, they can't be closed down and restricted to use. So if we lose that opportunity by taking away funds that we could use for match, then we're diminishing the ability of the program to go forward. Right now, we're still operating on a $5 surcharge that was established back in 1993, which actually is only worth about 50% of what it was back then. And that's probably even less when you consider the actual above average increase of inflation on shorefront properties. Just to reiterate on the conflicts, why we might lose money, if we're not able to manage the sites so that they are able to fulfill the purpose of launching recreational boats, then again, the feds can come back and take our money away. And since all our sites are unmonitored, we don't have the capacity and resources to put someone on site to say, no, you can't park here, you have to go somewhere else. It's very difficult to make that happen.
So all this can be teased out in a study, I would imagine.
Yep, and yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, any questions from the committee? Seeing none, we really appreciate your testimony. And with nobody else wanting to testify, I'm going to close the hearing, and I'm going to entertain. Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Let's take up this bill that we're on with the study, with the amendment.
Oh, well, second, I move the amendment.
Is there a second on the amendment?
Second.
Discussion.
Move to pass the amended.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. How about another motion?
Consent.
Is there a second? Okay, consent. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
Maybe I have to take a boat from this dock down to Hampton, your dock.
That would be wonderful, and the fact that they testified, the fact that it might generate revenue for the local community as well, that's a wonderful idea.
Oyster folks.
Oysters, who loves oysters? SB 228. Is there a motion on SB 228? I mean 29. Hello, 229, FN. Is there a motion on this one?
Oh, the other one.
The Bradley bill.
Oh, Bradley.
Yeah.
Move on to pass.
I'll second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Consent
Second.
by Senator Pearl, seconded by Senator Bertzel. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Senator Pearl will take this one out.
Senator Bertzel made
Oh, I thought you did.
Doesn't matter, I'll take it out.
Okay.
I'll take it out.
Who has more wetlands in the district? More swampy?
I'll take it out.
Senator Bertzel is going to take out that one. Perfect. All right, and
I have the amendment on 167 hydrogen bill, so we could do that if you want.
okay, I wanted to do my.
Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah,
I just let you know.
I have one bill, was it the affordable housing one? Agreement on electric distribution. Hang on 1 second. Is it 69? No, 68. Or is it 69? Hang on.
Full moderate income residential customers community project.
Yes. Did anybody refer? Do we refer on this one? Yes, is there a motion to re-refer on this one? Because it's not ready yet.
Which one? 168, right?
168, yeah.
I'll second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, so we're gonna re-refer this one. 168.
Yep. I liked it.
I do too. I still like it. It's a tool. Power agreements for electric distribution, that's 154?
You want to do consent on yours?
Yes, yeah, that'll be on consent. I beg your pardon?
168.
Yeah.
I'll move consent.
Second.
All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, it's on consent.
Which one are you trying to do? 64?
Not yet. I'm just trying to get as much as possible. Hang on.
Do you want to take this out, or you want me to take it out?
Which one?
The re-refer.
I'll take it out. It's on consent anyway, so. Setbacks relative to building areas.
Can we accept ones we haven't heard yet and just get through them really quick?
Which one? The ones that, yeah.
Can we accept ones we're gonna hear next week so we can get through them quicker? We guys, we do it different in the Senate, I keep hearing.
69.
I keep hearing we do it different in the Senate.
We do it different in the Senate. 69, which was, allows nonprofit entities in community,
I'll move up the pass.
and now, I think I had an amendment to that.
There we do.
And everything is helter-skelter lately. Where's my amendment? Not today, yeah. Yeah, I don't know why it's not in my folder, unless I took it out to read it, and then,
Yeah, it's not in mine either.
What do you got?
so it's not just me.
Yeah.
All right.
Just let us read it.
Can I see it real quick before you make a copy of it?
You got another one?
Yeah. The amended bill by replacing section 2 of the following. It says limited, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Line 5, nonprofit host means customer generator with a total peak generating capacity, no greater than 1 megawatt and less than 5 megawatts, used to offset electricity requirements in group consistently, exclusively of one or more customer generators. Who are nonprofits, provided that all customers are located within the same utility franchise service territory. A nonprofit host may be owned by either a public or a private entity. For this definition of nonprofit, it means community, technical colleges, universities, hospitals as defined by RSA 151.2, that operates a not-for-profit, nonprofit housing authorities, bona fide religious organizations, and Peace Development Authority.
So that fixed that issue with the
Yeah.
hospital definition.
Yeah. So I move amendment 0188S.
Which one are we on?
We need to move out fast first.
I thought we did.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I second it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I missed it.
And I'll third it if we need to. And I move 0188S.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, so is there a motion to move as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Consent. Second.
Okay. On consent, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, I'll take this one out, seeing how it's my bill. All right, Senator Waters.
Yeah, if you'd like, Mr. Chairman, I have the amendment on Senate Bill 167. This is the hydrogen bill.
Yep.
And let me, I don't know if you had copies of this yet, but if not, here they come. I'll tell you what we did.
Okay. Here.
Yeah, sorry. I just threw it in your direction.
I didn't know, I
I know, look at this sprawl. It's here.
All right, SB 167. And
Yeah.
do you want to make a motion first before you
I'll
introduce?
move 167, ought to pass.
Is there a second? Yes, okay.
So,
And
you know, good hearing, and I think the general support for the idea of let's getting going on making sure this industry can come here if it wants to. But what we did hear from the industry and from Jim Monahan was the desire to bring the definition of green hydrogen better into line with what is being used by the industry.
I give the lucky recipient.
I'm sorry, what?
She wanted to know why she had so many copies. She's last in line.
Because we want to make sure you got it.
One for each eye.
I'm like,
I just
Senator
pass it.
Waters,
You're
did you put
important.
this many amendments in?
All right. Hey, they're all the same.
We're trying to confuse you.
Doesn't take much these days, apparently.
So basically, what this does is that it is not so delimiting on the methods that can be used to produce the hydrogen. This was particularly desired by NextEra, who runs Seabrook, because they could use excess heat from the cooling process to generate hydrogen. But the definition that I had in there wouldn't have allowed that method, because it just said solar and wind and those things. So it opens it up to say, as long as it's a zero carbon, you see on 8 and 9, as long as it's zero carbon process, you can still, that's fine, and that'll make Seabrook and other such, you know, other places that have excess heat, right? And their manufacturers and power plants, whatever. So that was important to do. And then we had Mr. Wong's helpful testimony from DRA about if you're going to do a tax credit, this is the way you do it. And so we set a limit of $500,000 on this. Did the delimiters that are needed for capping it, and also the necessary allocation proportionally if there is more than the aggregate total of 5 million. Now, as I said in the testimony, whether this tax credit sticks to this bill is something finance is going to decide. So, you know, I mean, I don't know whether this will survive finance or not, and it's a shrug to me.
Policy-wise, yes.
So.
Yeah, you're on finance, right?
We're both on
I am.
finance.
Yeah, so you'll decide, you know, whether you want to spend some money this way or not. But, you know, it is part of the policy in terms of, will this help encourage the hydrogen industry? And as we heard from the testimony, there are some potentially very exciting and job-producing projects that might be coming to New Hampshire, and this might make some sense. But you finance folks will make the call on that, because it's going over to your neighborhood. Then one other thing too, in G here at the bottom, you know, the gas industry is very interested in potentially using gas. You know, if you make ammonia, you can make anything out of it, including hydrogen. You know, the possibility of using natural gas. Now, the environmental folks say, you know, no way, because what you're just doing is opening a door for the continuation of fossil fuel, and green hydrogen is supposed to be green. So what I thought I'd do was that study group that is set up, they said, just take a look at it. You know, Mark Brown and others were, you know, having some conversation around this. So I said, okay, let's just say you can look at this issue of the blending of hydrogen to existing natural gas, and consider policy recommendations for inclusion of hydrogen production from fossil fuel.
Are you talking about the nuclear study committee? The one that was?
No, the one that's in this bill.
Oh, the one that's in this bill, okay, I'm sorry.
So the bill itself basically is a bunch of definitions it's, setting up the study committee, and it's the tax credits. Those are the three parts of the bill. So, that's, I think the amendment addresses everything we heard in the hearing, and I just think it's a huge potential for New Hampshire, and I think we pass it.
All right, Senator Waters moves 0375S.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Bertzel. Discussion? All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Offer pass is amended.
Is there a second? Second by Senator Altshuler. And discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Do you want to take it out, or you want it on consent?
Go consent.
Consent.
We're gonna have a big day.
Second.
Second for consent. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, I think we're gonna close it out because we gotta get out of here. So is there a
Yeah.
motion to remove out of exec? Senator Waters, yeah.
So moved.
Seconded by Senator
Second.
Purcell. All in favor of getting out of exec? We're out of it.
Hey, good job, Mr. Chairman. Long year.
Good day, yeah.
Deborah, how are we gonna do this little conversation?
Yeah, I gotta, we've got a 12:45 caucus, right?
Committee here.